Okay, Geometry Day 4, Part 3. A square is a quadrilateral with 4 right angles and 4 congruent sides. A square is a parallelogram a rectangle and a rhombus, so it has the properties of all three. Okay, conditions for rectangles. If one angle of a parallelogram is a right angle, then the parallelogram is a rectangle. If the diagonals of a parallelogram are congruent, then the parallelogram is a rectangle. Okay, here's an example. This is pretty interesting, actually. A manufacturer builds a mold for a desktop so that AB is congruent to CD, BC is congruent to DA, and the angle of ABC is a rectangle. Why must this guy be a rectangle? Because we have a theorem that says, first of all, if opposite pairs of sides of a quadrilateral are congruent, we must have a parallelogram. This figure is a parallelogram and it has a right angle. Therefore, it must be a rectangle. Okay, on to the rest of the theorems and on to the evening. Okay, if one pair of consecutive sides hard to read my writing here. Consecutive means one after the other. If one pair of consecutive sides of a parallelogram are congruent, this one and this one, if they're congruent, then the parallelogram is a rhombus. If the diagonals of a parallelogram are perpendicular, then the parallelogram is a rhombus. If one diagonal of a parallelogram bisects a pair of opposite angles, then the parallelogram is a rhombus. These theorems are particularly important on the SAT. You may run into these also on the ACT, but the SAT is very likely to give you a geometry problem where the properties of a rhombus will help you solve a problem really quickly. Okay, finally, determine whether the conclusion is valid If it is, you tell why. If it is not, tell why not. Given EF is congruent to FG, EG is perpendicular to FH. What is perpendicular again? Perpendicular means meeting at a 90-degree angle. Okay? Okay. They conclude that this is a rhombus. Well, let's see. We have one pair of consecutive sides, congruent. That makes it a rhombus. We also have perpendicular diagonals. Again, that makes it a rhombus. Yes, the conclusion is valid because we have a four-sided figure. Here, given EB congruent to BG, FB congruent to BH, so these two diagonals bisect each other, and EG is congruent to FH, so if the diagonals of a parallelogram are congruent, the parallelogram is a rectangle, we've got congruent diagonals, we've got two consecutive sides, so we have a rectangle, we have a rhombus, triangle EBF is congruent to triangle EBH, so these sides are congruent, so this fourth side has to be congruent. So we know that we have a rhombus, we know that we have a parallelogram. Do we know that any of these angles is a right angle? We know that all four of these sides are congruent. I think we have isosceles right triangles. This is 45 and this is 45. This is 45 and this is 45. We have isosceles right triangles, so we conclude this is a square because angle F is a right angle, therefore all the angles are right angles. Yes, it's necessary, it's sufficient. I'm done for the evening. Study hard, quiz tomorrow, test on Wednesday.